Good evening, Father.
When you see the number is moving, so please type it saying others can join YouTube link, no?
Okay.
In the message, because I will be busy with the program.
Yes, Father. Yes.
I am admitting right now. I will try, I will help you. So after 100, it will not take. You have already touched.
Now 63 are there now.
Yes, Father. Yes.
I am admitting right now. I will try, I will help you.
Great.
Yes.
After 100, it will not take. I am admitting right now. I will try, I will help you. You have already touched.
Now 63 are there now.
Yes, Father. Yes.
You have already touched.
Now 63 are there now.
Yes, Father. Yes.
I am admitting right now. I will try, I will help you. You have already touched.
Great. Now 63 are there now.
I am admitting right now.
Yes.
Now 63 are there now.
Yes, Father. Yes.
You have already touched. Ferdinand, have you started? YouTube
Father, yes.
link, Ferdinand?
Yes, Father. Yes. Live has started. I'm typing the message actually.
Type it, yeah, because already 91 crossed.
Yeah.
98.
Yes, Father. Yes, Father.
It's 100. Others cannot join now. Already 100.
So they'll go to the YouTube.
YouTube, yeah. Yes, whoever comes, we will tell them.
Okay.
Father, what is your YouTube channel?
YouTube link. May Ferdinand give that link of this one also, no? YouTube link is given there. Those who want is there. Yeah.
Good evening, Father.
Good evening, madam.
Good evening, teachers.
Yes, Father. Yes.
Ferdinand, are you ready?
Yes, Father. Yes.
6:30 time. This is one of the important thing. Madam Charlotte, are you ready?
Yes, Father. Thank you.
Good evening, sir. Good morning, Father.
Farino, are you ready?
Yes, Father. Father, should I begin?
Farino?
Yes, Father. Father, can you hear me?
Shall we start?
Yes, Father. I am ready.
Father Sebastian?
Yes, Father. Yes, we can go ahead, Father. All set.
Okay.
6:30. Perfect. Everything is good. Thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
Ferdinand, you are
Yeah.
ready. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
Father.
Start.
A very good evening to Reverend Father Stan D'Souza, SJ, President of the Jesuit Educational Association, Reverend Father Raphael Joseph Hyde, SJ, Provincial of Jesuit of the Calcutta Province, Reverend Father John Ravi, SJ, Secretary of the Jesuit Education Association, South Asia, to all the esteemed principals, staff, students, members of the alumni, and all well-wishers. First, let me introduce myself. I am Farino Torquato, a teacher of St. Xavier's Collegiate School, Kolkata. I will be the Master of Ceremonies for this evening. I warmly welcome each one of you to the webinar organized by the Jesuit Education Institution, South Asia. This is the quincentenary year to mark the incident which took place on May 20th, 1521. That was 500 years ago. St. Ignatius was seriously injured when a cannonball had shattered his legs, not only his legs, but also his dreams. In the Battle of Pamplona, this cannonball moment marks the beginning of Ignatius' spiritual journey of conversion. The cannonball moment had transformed Inigo from a worldly man to St. Ignatius, a man of God. It opened up a new dream for Ignatius, one he had not thought of earlier. Ignatius had gone on to record about 7,000 letters in the world. The Ignatian year begins May 2021 to 31st July 2022. The theme of this webinar is Ignatius and young students through the prism of Ratio Studiorum. Without much ado, I would now invite St. Xavier's Primary School, Janti Pahari, Bankura, to begin the webinar with a welcome song, Mongol Deep Jale.
অন্ধকারে দু চোখ আলোয় ভরো প্রভু, তবু যারা বিশ্বাস করে না তুমি আছো, তাদের মার্জনা করো প্রভু। মঙ্গল দীপ জেলে অন্ধকারে দু চোখ আলোয় ভরো প্রভু, তবু যারা বিশ্বাস করে না তুমি আছো, তাদের মার্জনা করো প্রভু।
Then I don't think so we have to be there. We have to be here.
Thank you for the wonderful rendition of music, St. Xavier's Primary School, Bankura. In your own very small way, you have reinforced the theme, let light shine out of darkness. Next up, we have our provincial, Reverend Father Raphael Joseph Hyde, SJ. He is the 8th provincial superior for the Jesuits of the Calcutta province. Father Raphael Hyde is a man of few words, yet a lot of actions.
Hello.
He is a very soft-spoken person, and all his dealings have been very gentle. He has truly upheld the motto of the Society of Jesus, Magis. The Latin expression is ad majorem deo gloriam, which means for the greater glory of God. May I now invite Reverend Father Raphael Joseph Hyde, SJ, to kindly deliver the welcome address.
Dear Father Stanislaus D'Souza, President of the Jesuit Conference of South Asia, Father John Ravi, Secretary, Jesuit Educational Association, Professor Charlotte Simpson Vegas, Professor of St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, and speaker at today's webinar, principals and headmasters, Jesuit companions, staff and students of our institutions, and all those joining us for this webinar on Ignatius and the young students through the prism of the Ratio Studiorum. I extend to each of you a warm welcome. Reflecting on the Battle of Pamplona, Christopher Kerr, the executive director of the Ignatian Solidarity Network, says, "Cannonball movements are experiences that forces us to stop how we are living and invites us to live in a new way." May 21st, 1521 at Pamplona is the defining moment in the life of St. Ignatius. This event changed the orientation of St. Ignatius's life totally with a different worldview. All of us have experienced our own cannonball movements in life. This changed the course of path completely in our lives too. The world at the time of St. Ignatius and the world today is somewhat in a same setting of transition. 15th century Europe was evolving and trying to respond to the rising inventions and discoveries towards a new world order. Today, post-COVID pandemic, we are no way different from the time of St. Ignatius. We are in transition towards a new world order too. Karl Lorenz, in his book Introduction to the Context of the Ratio Studiorum says, and I quote, "A signature characteristic of medieval inquiry was the importance it ascribed to the written word. In the Middle Ages, books were the source of knowledge, truth, and wisdom. Books by acclaimed authors and authorities were the objects of inquiries, and their substance and form were the subject of analysis. With the advent, close quotes, with the advent of the printing press and subsequent publication of books of famous authors, the approach of educators towards education changed from their old perspectives. Students were asked to stick to textbooks only and nothing more. However, Jesuits at that time were thinking differently to address the need of the time. The Ratio Studiorum affirms that the development of the student's intellectual capacity is the school's most important characteristic part. However, this development will be defective and even dangerous unless it is strengthened and completed by the training of the will and the formation of character. The Jesuits differed from these and similar prototypes in three significant ways. First, after a certain point, they formally and professedly designated the staffing and management of schools a true ministry of the order, indeed its primary ministry. Second, they actually set about to create such institutions and assumed responsibility for their continuance. Third, these institutions were not primarily intended for the training of the clergy, but for boys and young men who envisaged a worldly career. No group in the church or in society at large had ever undertaken an enterprise of such a grand scale in which these three factors were placed. An example would be important to delineate the view. Rules 1 to 3 of the Ratio Studiorum with respect to the professor of mathematics outline a program of mathematical studies for students of physics and a few brief suggestions on how the content should be handled. 1. He should spend about three-quarters of an hour of class time in explaining the elements of Euclid to the students of physics. After 2 months, when his students are somewhat familiar with the subject, he should add some geography or astronomy or a similar matter which the students enjoy hearing about. This added material is to be given on the same day with Euclid or on alternate days. 2. Every month, or at least every second month, he should have one of the students solve some celebrated mathematical problems in the presence of a large gathering of students of philosophy and theology. Afterwards, if he wishes, the solution may be discussed. 3. Once a month, generally on a Saturday, the class period should be given over to a review of the subject matter completed that month. One may wonder why Ignatius was so concerned about mathematics. Father John W. O'Malley, S.J., in his book The Jesuits, A History from Ignatius to the Present, gives a glimpse of how far reaching effects of mathematics had in the life of the Jesuit mission. Despite their concentration on literary genres as the core of the curriculum, many of the schools included a strong program of mathematics. 2 years after the Roman College opened its doors, it added another under the rubric of philosophy a chair of mathematics, understood to include geometry, optics, and astronomy. A major turning point occurred when in 1563 the German Jesuit Christopher Clavis assumed the chair, which he held until his death in 1612. Clavis, by force of his writings and the prestige he enjoyed among his peers, launched a tradition that continued strong among the Jesuits. An important consultant of Pope Gregory XIII on the reform of the calendar, he was also the teacher of Matteo Ricci, the Jesuit missionary in China, who used the mathematical skills he learned at the Roman College to win the favor of the imperial court. Beside mathematics, Umali continues, theater had by then become a distinguishing mark of Jesuit schools and was considered by Jesuits as an essential component in their educational program. It taught poise and put eloquence, the mark of a leader in society, into practice. It sparkled enthusiasm in the students. Ratio Studiorum is also advanced in its thinking that it is applicable to this day. What modern educationists talk of follow up by teachers and their superiors in the schools is well explained 500 years ago in this manual. For instance, in the chapter Rules of the Rector, point 1, the purpose of the society in including colleges and universities is twofold. First, she wants to equip her members with a good liberal education and with other skills required in her ministry. Number two, he will have a prefect of studies to assist him in administration of the curriculum, and he shall delegate to him all authority which he considers necessary for the right conduct of that office. The rector of the college which supplies masters of classical literature and of grammar, shall, towards the end of their studies, select an experienced professor and have those who are about to begin teaching meet with him for an hour 3 times a week to acquire pedagogical technique. They shall take turns in giving the prediction and in dictating, in writing, in correcting, and in performing other duties of a good teacher. Number 18 says every month or at least every other month, the rector shall call a meeting of the teachers of all classes below logic, and at which the prefect of higher studies should be present. At these conferences, some of the rules for the teachers of the lower studies should be read. He shall make it clear to the teachers that they are free to express Skinner's behavior in a different form in the rules of the prefect of lower studies. Number 36 of Ratch's Studiorum says, he, prefect of lower studies, should also see to it that besides the public prizes, other small tokens or symbols of victory which the rector will provide are awarded by the instructor in their own classes to spur on their pupils when they seem to merit distinction by besetting a rival in competition or interpreting an entire book of an author or reciting it from memory or some other similar noteworthy performance. In a nutshell, commemorating the quincentenary of Ignatius's cannonball movement as educators, it is fitting to look at the Ratio Studiorum, the greatest gift of the early fathers of the Society of Jesus to us. It is a moment of introspection to put ourselves in the shoes of St. Ignatius and ask ourselves how he would respond to our context today if he were to be with us. And perhaps after this webinar, we may introspect ourselves with the help of the call of the King. Welcome again. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Father, for sharing with us those pearls of wisdom. They will certainly find echo in our hearts and deeds. Before I invite the resource person of the day, I would like to tell you something about her. She is the Vice Principal of the Education Department of St. Xavier's College, Autonomous. She has been in the teaching faculty for the past 24 years. She has a master's degree in economics and in education. The title of her doctoral thesis was A Study of the Psychosocial Elements of Jesuit Education. She is presently the state coordinator of the ICAF West Bengal. It's an acronym for All India Catholic University Federation. She is a member of the governing body of Ankur Kala, an organization which encourages the empowerment of women and children. She is a member of the general body of Seva Kendra, a social service arm of the Archdiocese of Calcutta. She has been trained by the HRD department to conduct cultural studies programs in various educational institutions. She has to her name a number of publications in various journals and books. She has been awarded the Loreto Medal for all-round excellence. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Charlotte Simpson Vegas.
A very good evening to all the respected fathers and all the esteemed dignitaries present here today. It is my honor and privilege to be able to share with you what I have learned about Jesuit education and be able to contribute to today's webinar, Ignatius and young students, through the prism of the Ratio Studiorum. We are at a very important time of Jesuit history. We are celebrating the Ignatian year and remembering the cannonball moment. As
Yes.
Father Provincial very clearly spoke about how the cannonball moment reminds each one of us of our cannonball moments. When purpose meets a new path and we undergo transformation, the way Saint Ignatius went through transformation after the Battle of Pamplona, and when his leg was shattered by a cannonball. We are reminded of our very own cannonball moments, moments of pain and suffering, which then led to joy, delight, and incredible happiness. We are reminded of the phases that we have moved through to come to terms with our own understanding of self and discerning the Spirit of God in our lives. We have moved through our own personal journeys, had our own encounters, and after confusion, a feeling of desolation, perhaps we experienced a certain clarity of who we are, what is our purpose for life, and we experienced God as a pilgrim accompanying us through our journey. And we received a certain kind of confirmation. So through this experience of Saint Ignatius, and through our own experience and our own journey, I would like to share with each of the esteemed dignitaries and audience present here today my thoughts on Ignatius and young students through the prism of the Ratio Studiorum. My talk will be divided into two parts. First, I will very briefly speak about the Ratio Studiorum, and then I'll speak about Ignatius and young students through the prism of the Ratio Studiorum. While we speak about this cannonball moment, I'm also reminded of what J.R.R. Tolkien spoke about when he referred to eucatastrophe. That is a moment of tragedy leading to moments of joy. We find the same in the works of Shakespeare, if I have to quote one such work, A Winter's Tale, or in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. So going back to this point that I mentioned, each one of us has our own cannonball moment. So this is a snapshot of the Ratio Studiorum. We can see that there are rules for the provincial, the rector, prefect of studies, common rules for professors of higher studies, rules of professors of sacred scripture, rules of the prefect of lower studies, going on to rules for written exams, laws for prizes, rules for teachers of lower classes, rules of teachers of rhetoric, humanities, so on and so forth. rules of scholastics, instructions for those engaged in 2-year review of theology, rules for the teacher's assistant or the beadle, rules for extern students, and rules for the academy. So this is a snapshot of what the Ratio Studiorum of 1599 was all about. From this snapshot, and we also heard about it from Father Provincial's welcome address, we have many points to take and many points to learn from. As educators, we have much to share with our students so that we become responsible for their growth, not only intellectually, but also in terms of their character and their morals. We find the concept of the written examinations, which are so popular today, was talked about in the Ratio. And the Jesuit fathers not only talked about the exams, but they also talked about prizes, as they knew that motivation is an ingredient for success. The moment we are motivated, we are very ready to succeed and to expand our potential. So they brought in the concept of prizes, pageants, academies, and contests. The teacher was supposed to be one who would inspire, whose love was shown through deeds, through his act of service. He would practice virtue and was totally responsible for the spiritual welfare of his students. There was the concept of examining the conscience, which we know is the examen, where we think about and reflect about all our experiences, perhaps the experiences that we've had in the course of a day, to see where we have failed, to see how we can improve. And it takes us through a process of reflection. In the Ratio, we also find some important points with regard to avoiding citing to excess, avoiding citing authorities not otherwise read, and making conclusions based on only cogent arguments, and to have respect for other points of view, to have respect for criticism as long as it was constructive, as long as it would help in growth and development. And the concept of the lecture notes, very interestingly, was also part of what the Ratio Studiorum contributed. The lecture note, which is so very important and a part of understanding that the student has actually understood what we are trying to say. So for the student to understand what we are trying to say, we have to prepare ourselves as teachers. Prepare, do sufficient reference work, and always leave room for questioning. Questioning being a very important part of the student's intellectual development. But not only the development of the intellect, the development of the heart, the development of morals, the development of good values. Within the Ratio, if we go through the detailed notes on the Ratio, we find there is room for what modern psychologists will talk about as reinforcement. That is, being generous in giving praise for what the student deserves. We all know that praise helps a student to feel motivated. He or she wants to succeed, wants to expand his or her potential. We do know the psychologist Thorndike talks about 3 laws of success. And one law is related to reinforcement, giving authentic praise, well-deserved praise, so that the student wants to repeat that successful moment. And in doing so, he or she expands his or her potential. The teacher was once again called to be one who is friendly, at the same time a philosopher and a guide, and was expected to be impartial in all dealings, to treat all students equally, whether they were rich or whether they were poor. What was so very interesting was that in the ratio, we find references to the interdisciplinary method of teaching. Today, you know, with the National Policy 2020, so much of emphasis is being given to the interdisciplinary nature of studying, learning, the CBCS system, the entire structure that the policy talks about. It talks about an interdisciplinary method of teaching. So if a student is from the subject literature, he or she is encouraged to also bring in mathematics. We are reminded, for example, that Through the Looking Glass and Alice in Wonderland was written by Lewis Carroll, who was actually a mathematician. So the interdisciplinary method is a method which the ratio spoke about, and which the national policy, which I just mentioned, reinforces again and again. Review of subject matter once a month, mentioning the name of the student who has won the prize, and through the academies that were set up for theology, for grammar, for rhetoric, for philosophy, a love of learning was to be encouraged. If we go back to the snapshot which was just shared, we will see that the ratio categorizes the entire discourse into 4 categories. One is administration. For example, you have the provincial, the functions and the rules for provincial, for rector, for prefect, for professors, rules for the administrators. Then we have curriculum, graded curriculum. Modern psychology talks about sequencing and grading curriculum so that it is within the reach of the student. So a graded curriculum, be it a curriculum for theology, philosophy, but the curriculum would be graded. The ratio speaks about a method, a way of teaching each of the subjects within its fold. And it also speaks about discipline, a code of conduct, regularity, punctuality. So we find within the ratio these 4 categories very clearly mentioned. And therefore, the ratio Studiorum is this plan of studies in Jesuit schools, a rule book to codify major elements of Jesuit education. Interestingly, it was written when the Jesuits were already managing schools. Interestingly, it was written when the Jesuits were already managing schools. It was the result of years of experimentation. Brilliant minds, many teachers, administrators, experts came together, and for long years, they worked on it. And finally, we had the ratio Studiorum. We find the impact of Renaissance theory and practice on the ratio. We find the influence of the University of Paris on the ratio. And we find that the ratio was the result of a lot of tests and what the Jesuits observed in the many schools that they had set up. Observed, tested, experimented upon, and finally we had the ratio Studiorum of 1599. It is applicable in many ways today, however, not in a literal sense of the term. You find that conditions have changed, situations have changed, rules and regulations have changed. So a universal curriculum, as suggested by the ratio, is not applicable literally, but what we can gain from the ratio is applicable and definitely influences every aspect of teaching learning. The teacher, the functions of the teacher, the curriculum, the grading and sequencing of curriculum, the method of discipline, where the teacher is friend, philosopher, and guide, not a hard taskmaster, but teaches the student with kindness. And I recall at this point what Rabindranath Tagore wrote about his memories of his early years in St. Xavier's School. He remembered the love and compassion of his teacher, Father Penaranda, who asked him how he was feeling when he saw that he was not feeling well. So the Jesuits anticipated modern practices in more ways than one. And we find that the ratio can be applied in this way. And if we look at it in this and from this lens, as I mentioned a little earlier, it went through a whole procedure. There were studies done on it. 6 Jesuits got together and were given this work of going through it, eliminating some of the problem areas, adding some points to make it even better. And they were expected to send the principles that they followed in order to improve the ratio that was there before them. Once this happened, it then went to the Roman College. There again, there were fathers and assistants who edited the ratio. And then Father General himself, along with his assistant, went through it. It was then sent to various provinces, and Father General very categorically informed all the provincials to see how the ratio was working on a day-to-day basis. So when they got back for the general congregation, the 5th general congregation, they could share their ideas and come up with the ratio in its final format. And one problem that remained and which was worked upon was that it was very, very large a work, and it had to be cut to, it had to be, reduced, and the various categories, etc., could all be encompassed within the possibilities of a shorter document. So that was one of the important points that came up, and finally the ratio was sent for putting it into practice to the various provinces. The factors that influenced the ratio were Jerome Nadal's 1551 plan for the college at Messina, the later plan of the Ordo Studiorum, Part 4 of the Jesuit Constitution, and the substantial and works of Father James Ledesma. We find that sometimes there is a very biased way of looking at Jesuit education when we read some of the works of historians of Western education. And we see that Jesuit education and the ratio is not always given its rightful place and position. And one reason why this happens is because the writers of that time who criticized it, for example, works by Gabriel Camparaye, and later you have works by Payne, who translated what Gabriel Camparaye had written, they were not really based on original documents, and they were based on second-hand sources. So one person speaking to the other, but not going back to the spiritual exercises, not going back to the constitutions, not going back to the primary sources that needed to be studied. So you had sometimes unfavorable criticism of the ratio because it was based on, the criticism was based on second-hand sources of information. However, one such work, and I quote this work by Robert Rusk, gives a very balanced view of Jesuit education and a balanced view of how the ratio in many different ways has impacted the present system of education. And in doing so, Rusk was able to ward off this criticism, this biased criticism of the ratio. So some of these points that Robert Rusk made, I will be discussing it in short. But the interesting thing was that he had done a thorough analysis by going to the ratio itself, the primary document, studying the constitutions, especially part 4, going through the spiritual exercises. He was also well versed with other writers, Shvikara, or Sharmo, Cochrane,
I am Lakshmi Kumari of
Octavius,
Standard 6B
many
Certificate High School.
authors which helped Rusk make the analysis and make his understanding of the contributions of the ratio a very authentic and valid one. So what were some of these contributions, and what did Rusk say were the ways in which the Jesuits, through the ratio,
I am Lakshmi Kumari of Standard 6B
anticipated
High School.
modern education? Firstly, it gave a universal and a uniform method. And the Jesuits, far from being subordinated to the method, were trained to be teachers using that method really efficiently. There was mention of importance to be given to mother tongue, maths, natural sciences, and direct teaching of the classics like Latin and Greek. Today, we have the concept of the direct method. You find in the ratio there is reference to the direct method in more ways than one. You also find that drama as an educational method, which today is followed in many schools. For example, we say, let us use the enactive method. The enactive method of, say, the psychologist Brunner. Brunner talks about the enactive method, where drama, for example, is one way to make the teaching of a subject really interesting. So it could be history, it could be any subject. One could dramatize it so that the students are active participants in it, and therefore they learn much. The Jesuits also talked about supervision, to supervise students, to guide them, to counsel them. They replaced punishment with supervision. The concept of promotion of the abler students was also referred to in the ratio. And the idea of providing moral, religious instruction, the idea of hearing the student, listening to the student. Today we know about the concept of talk therapy. We talk out our problem to the right person. It could be a counselor, it could be a confidant, it could be a friend, and we feel better. The Jesuits, through their ratio Studiorum, showed that they very well acknowledged this idea of listening to the students, hearing them, hearing their problems, to listen with the heart. All of this was very important. So it is not only intellectual development, but development of the heart, an integrated person, a whole person, holistic development. And the success of the ratio could be seen through the many learned teachers, preachers, writers, philosophers, scientists, men of varying talents that were produced. For example, the names of Voltaire. Although, when we read about Voltaire, we do know that today we will refer to Voltaire as a person with special gifted ability. So the Jesuits at that time had learned how to teach those who are gifted, those of special talent and ability. Montesquieu, for example, the political philosopher, Descartes, the philosopher and mathematician. They also contributed to a variety of areas, be it the genre of tragedy, comedy, drama. Many aspects were influenced by the ratio. So it is not only that the ratio produced Jesuits, the ratio also produced men of varying talents and varying abilities. And the success of the ratio could be also looked at from that angle. During the period of suppression, then after the period of restoration, we had what is called the new society of the Jesuits. And in this new society of the Jesuits, we do see the ratio was still and is still till date influencing our educational system. I did say a little earlier that the universal curriculum that the ratio spoke about, in its literal sense, cannot be applied today because of the varying conditions of the world and our educational systems. However, the ratio can be applied in another set of ways, and we are going to discuss it briefly in a while. So coming back to the point when there was this oppression of the society, obviously the development of these schools took a beating. And after the suppression, when there was restoration of the society, it took a little time for the schools to, to get back to what they were prior to the suppression. And this was because many Jesuits had changed occupation, some had died, some had moved on. The state had come into the entire idea of controlling education. Property was confiscated. But in spite of all of that, the society again developed, schools were established, elementary schools, secondary schools, and university. In the mission, in the areas of mission of the Jesuits, elementary schools came up quite rapidly, although Ignatius was not so much in favor of establishing elementary schools in Europe, and that was because there was a scarcity of manpower. However, in the areas of mission of the Jesuits, there were plenty of elementary schools, secondary schools, colleges, and universities. And coming back to the point as to how the ratio influences the system of education today, we briefly mentioned the ways a little earlier, but to be very specific, I would say it influences education today in this way. That is, you find that the Jesuits, they continuously spoke about mastery. So when the intellect is developed, after that, there should be mastery to make that subject one's own. And for that to happen, psychologists today will speak about giving a number of exercises, allowing students to practice and practice, to repeat, to reinforce their learning. And the ratio mentions various ways in which this could be done. For example, original essays would be written in imitation of the authors, and then there would be a public hearing of that essay. There would be debates, disputations, repetitions. This would happen perhaps daily, weekly, annually. And we had earlier mentioned the concept of prizes, contests, pageants, etc. All of this helping the student to gain mastery over learning and develop not only the mind, but also develop the heart and nourish the soul. And for this, the Jesuits were very, very aware that motivation was important. And to motivate a teacher with kindness and compassion was important. So the end product was growth of the student, along with good habits, development of suitable skills, mastery of learning that came through repetition and practice and exercising, being open to criticism, learning from criticism, learning to become excellent at what they do. And this is definitely, I'm sure we would agree to this. This is definitely what influences teaching today. And therefore, the ratio of 1599 influences teaching today in more ways than one. we find that we can go back to the ratio and use the accumulated wisdom that the Jesuits had to offer for our instruction today. But just as music has to be transposed to a new key when we sing, similarly, the ratio has to be transposed to a new key, to a new circumstance. But the essence of it remains intact. You find that the concept of Ciceronian verbal grace, eloquentia perfecta, that it is important to help in the development of a student who can speak eloquently, a student who is able to think for himself or herself, and very importantly, is able to communicate what he or she has learned, to communicate it eloquently. Now, eloquence will be determined by the nature and the context in which we are. But to be able to communicate eloquently, to communicate what we have learned properly, effectively, so that our audience understands what we are saying, all of this could be seen as an impact of the ratio. The ratio also speaks about pre-election. Today, for our learning designs and for our lesson plans, we talk about objectives of the lesson. So the pre-election was a tool which was talked about so long ago by the Jesuits. You find it mentioned in different ways in the Ratio Studiorum of 1599. It was a method where we introduced the student to the lesson. We explain to the student the material at hand so that the student understands not only the what, but the how of the study. And much of the study happens very smoothly after that. So understanding, mastery, motivation, developing good study habits, developing intellectual skills, as well as skills of the heart, skills of the mind, nourishing the soul, and making a continuous and a continual effort to grow, to become a better human being. All of that is the impact of the ratio as we see it today. And the Ratio Studiorum was in itself also influenced by the pedagogy of the University of Paris, by Quintilian's manuscript and works in the Institutio Oratoria. But we must remember that the Jesuits did not imitate in a slavish manner. They did not simply resurrect old ideas. They did not simply restore old ideas. They brought to the classroom their own distinctive spirit. They brought to the classroom years of experimentation based on observation. So they added their own special effects to the learning. And therefore, it was not a slavish imitation of what Quintilian spoke about, nor the University of Paris spoke about. The Jesuits were concerned with providing an education which was serviceable, an education which was practice and practical oriented. And therefore, it was not a slavish imitation. So based on all of this, through the prism of the ratio, what would Ignatius be telling our young students today? And what would Ignatius be telling us as educators about how we should train our students today? I would like to once again go back to the words of Father General, Father Arturo Sosa, who spoke about the university being a center of reconciliation and justice. I would like to go back to Father Adolfo Nicholas, who spoke about the fact that we should train our students to think for themselves and not to be caught up in what he termed as the globalization of superficiality. We see this all too well today with social media, For example, friendships which are so meaningful, which are so important, which require so much of nurture. If you look at the Facebook concept of friendship, it's so easy to make a friend and to break the friendship. We can accept friends and we may not accept friends. We may even drop the friendship. So something as beautiful as friendship can be brought down to something so superficial. So I'm reminded about what Father Adolfo Nicholas said, that we must train our students to be able to overcome what he terms as the globalization of superficiality. They should learn to think deeply. They should learn to go into the depth of the matter. They should learn to look at various sources, various references, and then make their informed decisions. I'm also reminded about what Pope Francis said, and that became part of the logo of the 36th General Congregation, rowing into the deep, the part taken from the writings of Luke, rowing into the deep, to go into the depth of the matter. I'm reminded about what Pope Benedict XVI talks about when he said, go on to the frontiers. I'm reminded about what Father Pedro Arupe said, to be men and women for others. I'm reminded about what Father Colvin Bach speaks about. He says to train students to become competent, compassionate, committed. So I would say this is what Ignatius is telling us. And this is what Ignatius would want us to do when we are given the responsibility as educators to form young minds. The student is at the center of the educational activity. And it is our job, it is our duty to prepare them for life. This is what Ignatius would perhaps be telling us. To prepare them for life in the here and now, but this would also include eternal life, which merges into our here and now and makes each moment so sacred, so important, makes each moment of ours in our classroom such a great responsibility. Ignatius would tell us to help our students want to excel, to keep trying, to keep succeeding, to keep excelling, to want the more, to go further, magis. Ignatius would want our students to be developed body, mind, and soul, what the Jesuits would term as cura personalis, to take each person in his or her unique way and provide them with an education most fitting for him or her, to help in the development of the heart, mind, and soul, and all of this for the greater glory of God. All of this for the greater glory of God, to make our contributions to ourselves and at the same time use those talents for the good of our community, to become agents of social change. This is what I suppose St. Ignatius would tell young students and tell us about the manner in which we should train our students so that they become open to growth, not rigid, open to growth, intellectually competent, religious, develop a spiritual core, to be loving, to be committed to justice, and as Ignatius would say, to show love in deeds and not merely in words. To go back to the characteristics of Jesuit education in short, we need to provide our students with an education where they find God in all things. In all things. And once again, I'm reminded about what Father Adolfo Nicholas said. He said, education should help the student to go from knowledge to wisdom. Wisdom, where he or she understands his or her place in the world. deals with the world with empathy, takes ownership of making this world a sustainable and beautiful place to live in. I'm reminded about the universal apostolic preferences, where our students, through proper training by us as educators, would learn about the path to God, showing the way to God, accompanying the neglected, the marginalized, the downtrodden, accompanying the youth in their journey, which is filled with anxiety,
Ma'am, the time is
tension.
over.
Sometimes they feel so desolate. We need to console them. And to make our world a beautiful place to live in, so caring for our world. And to go back to the characteristics of Jesuit education, and that also would be a manner in which we would train our students so that they pursue excellence, where we are able to collaborate. Lay and Jesuit collaboration happens beautifully, meaningfully, and we prepare our students for a value-oriented life, a beautiful life, and they feel that they are loved, they're cared for, and we're concerned about them. And therefore, it's very important for us to be able to share the Ignatian tradition with all our students, for them to understand that they are not alone. When we go back to the spiritual exercises, we see through the encounter of Ignatius with God, we see that we can understand so much more about our personal encounters with God. We can discern the Spirit of God in the meanderings and the rapids of our life, to know that we are not alone, to know that God is there with us, the pilgrim moving along with us in our journey. We need to teach our students about the Ignatian tradition. When we speak about the Ignatian tradition, we need to give to them a legacy of the Ignatian tradition. For example, love should be shown in deeds. To put the entire context before our eyes. What would it benefit a person to gain the entire world but to lose his soul? This sentence made a big impact on Ignatius, to be able to explain to our students the meaning of it, the depth of that statement. And then they start feeling that they belong to this group. They are gifted with this legacy. They are taught about the way to pray, the work to undertake. For example, option for the poor. Decree 4, GC 32. A faith and a justice concept, social justice that go hand in hand. That we have this very important role to play, where we reach out to the marginalized, we reach out to the downtrodden. So our students are able to see this not as some burden or some onerous job, but a part of what it means to be in a Jesuit institution. And they take to it very beautifully. And through it, hopefully, they'll be able to see the face of God. And while we do this as Ignatian educators, helping our students to be rooted in the Ignatian tradition, we also have to be aware of the fact that much of our time sometimes is spent on leadership, it is spent on management, but we are not always so concerned with spending time to develop a vision, a mission. Spending time to develop this would also mean spending time with them. Our students have to see in us role models. They have to see that we are practicing what we preach. They need to see that through our work, they can also experience God in their life. Otherwise, the entire process becomes meaningless. And for this, it is important that we have what is called creative fidelity. We need to change according to the context and the situation, but never forgetting that we need to be role models. We need to inspire them. They need to feel inspired. And we need to nurture their imagination. And for this, it is very important that they find this educational journey personal and engaging. There, once again, I'll refer to the book written by John O'Malley, The First Jesuits, where he speaks about how the early Jesuits, the first Jesuits, they engaged people in conversation. So we need to engage our students in conversation. They need to be able to speak to us freely, openly. They need to know that we are there for them. And this talking with them and listening to them, allowing them to talk with us, does not mean filling silences with empty words. It does not mean empty chatter, but it means giving them that space to express their anxiety, to express their pain, to express their trauma, and to know that there is someone who loves them, who cares for them, and will help them in their journey. So it must be personal and engaging. And for that, we as educators, we have to shift from an old mindset to a new mindset, which St. Paul, I quote, refers to as reminding, where we shift our mindset to think in new ways, to think of life from their lens, to understand that they are caught today between the demands of their future profession and what it is for them to have a sense of vocation. Today, the sense of vocation, for example, we will very clearly be able to see it. For example, in the healthcare industry. But teaching also belongs to the very same industry, if we can call it an industry. And teaching also should be vocation oriented, and we know that. We say a teacher makes a difference. So if the teacher has to make a difference, we have to also understand that the teacher is caught between the pull of requiring to be a professional with accountability and transparency, and the pull of following one's vocation. We sometimes forget about professionalism, but to do what is right to make a difference for that child. The student also must learn. We refer to the interdisciplinary way of teaching and learning, that they should not become narrow specialists, but they have to become generalists. At the same time, develop expertise in their area of interest. They need to contribute to their community. They should not only look at talents that are meant for self, but these talents are meant for making the world a better place to live in. So we as educators, Ignatius would tell us to understand that our students are caught between these varying pulls of the demands of the workplace, demand of school, studies, at the same time, demand of home life, spend time for play, spend time to make friendships. All of this, we as educators need to keep in mind. Ignatius would tell us this so that we could make the educational journey for our students a good one. But we have to be aware, as I come to the conclusion of my talk, that each student requires a different kind of handling. And we referred to cura personalis a little earlier, because each student has a different need. So we need to know what that need is as educators. And we need to invite them, make them feel that they belong, and understand ourselves that there are a variety of pathways. And each one requires our love, requires our trust, but maybe at a different distance from the center. And just as the ratio Studiorum would talk about reinforcement and recognition, so we celebrate the contribution of each student, each person, and we instill in them a sense of ownership in the Jesuit enterprise. And we develop amongst them core groups who we see are people who have benefited from that legacy and will be able to pass on this beautiful legacy to others. And as a result of all of this, and as I end, I would say that this entire value of Christian humanism, which is a pearl of great price that has been offered to Jesuit education, that has much to offer to us about the way in which we should teach our students so that they become better human beings. When we talk about Christian humanism, we go back to Erasmus, and in simple terms, a good education should help us develop self so that we can contribute to our society and make our society a harmonious place to live in. And therefore, this should be shown to our students as an alternative to materialism, pragmatism, relativism. It should help them to have a moral compass. We keep referring to it, development of the intellect, and at the same time, development of the heart, to have a moral compass. For them to understand that it is important to become a good human being. Humanitas, learned humanities of the pietas. All of this becomes important in our journey. And we understand that there are many possibilities of many pathways to God. And we celebrate the achievements of each of our students. And in short, we know that this journey is not a finished solution, but it is a creative work in progress, a creative work in progress. So we will falter, we will fall, we will fail, but the beauty lies in rising up each time we fall. And may the cannonball moments that each one of us experience, big or small, I'm sure in all our lives we have experienced big and small cannonball moments. I'm sure that experience in itself will lead to us enjoying incredible delight and happiness in this journey with our students. I think this is what Ignatius could be telling us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. In fact, for the beautiful and meaningful message, I am certain each and every one who is present here has something to take back from this talk. May I now invite St. Xavier School Burdwan to sing a devotional song, Jesus, Lamb of God.
Ferdinand, song 2.
Yeah.
Da 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 da
Thank you, St. Xavier School, Burdwan. That was extremely melodious and enacted so beautifully. In fact, it definitely reminds us that Jesus, you are certainly my all in all. Next up, we will have Reverend Father John Ravi S.J., the Secretary of the Jesuit Educational Association, South Asia. He has also been a member of the International Commission on the Apostolate of the Jesuit Education. He has been the principal of St. Xavier's, Delhi, Shabad, and Jaipur for many years before he took up the role of being the Secretary of the Jesuit Educational Association. May I now invite Father Ravi John S.J. to kindly share his reflection with us.
Good evening to one and all. I won't take much time because we are already behind the schedule. And Father Raphael, my dear Jesuit companion, dear teachers, students, alumni fraternity, thank you so much for attending this in this program. Dr. Vegas very beautifully summarized how those Ignatius lived in the 16th century, how he was concerned about the future, about the youth, what is going to come. So you could foresee the future for the youth today. Even if we have to be alive, schools and almost 70 colleges, institutions all over the South Asia, I would earnestly request you, as Ignatius desire, let us continue to accompany our youth today. Our youth are, in my opinion, standing at a crossroad. They do not know where to go, how to go. So my invitation for the teachers, the mentors, can we become the signboard? Can we become the lighthouse for struggling humanity? So we have already beautiful heritage with us, Ignatian legacy. So I would earnestly request all the teachers, principals, to go back to our roots, what Ignatius wanted us. It is not just for the sake of running an institution. There are several thousands of institutions. We have 15 lakhs of schools in India, but we should be different. So without taking much time, I would appeal to all of you, be inspired. Though we have concluded the Ignatian year, I am very confident Ignatius will walk with us at every moment. He is there to console us, to strengthen us, but we need to be open. So on behalf of the organizing committee, Father Sebastian, the Calcutta Jesuits, and the schools, participating schools, Father Raphael, who gave a beautiful introduction, I extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you. Let us continue to be inspired. We need many more Ignatius. We need many more Francis Xavier. So can we become one? So that is the invitation for all of you. And God bless you all. I know it is a bit late today. Apologies for delaying the program, but I'm sure you will have something to carry back home when you get back your home. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Reverend Father Ravi John. In fact, to quote Sir Edmund Hillary, it is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. For this webinar to be on the road, there are a number of people who have worked tirelessly behind and in front of the scenes. I would first like to thank
If you can hear me, I would like to tell you that
D'Souza.
your voice is not.
I would like to thank Father Stan D'Souza, the president of the South Asian Association. I would also like to thank Father Raphael Joseph Hyde, provincial of Calcutta Jesuit province, for taking his time out and being present with us, and for giving a wonderful welcome address. The person I need to thank most is Father John Ravi, the Secretary of the Jesuit Educational Association South Asia, who has been the man behind coordinating this entire thing. The next person who has always been working silently from the background is Father Sebastian James H.A., the province coordinator for education of Calcutta province.
Sir, your voice is not clear.
I need to also thank our professor, the spokesperson for the day, Dr. Charlotte Simpson Vegas, who has put this entire message in a beautiful nutshell for all of us to take back home. I need to thank all the principal, staff, students of the video presentation, the principal, staff, students, alumni of the schools for assisting, for their support in joining this webinar. I need to also thank the friends from Educate Marches from across the globe. The person who's been behind all the technical assistance and the live streaming. A big thank you goes to Ferdinand. And last but not the least, I need to thank all our online audience and friends. Therefore, may I now invite St. Xavier School, Durgapur, to end this webinar with the Ignatian anthem.
Noble knight, leader of a bravery, lead us on, oh lead us on. We will fight, need thy sway, need thy sway. What the foes gather near, we don't fear, we don't fear. Will not shun, will not quit this a noble career. We will fight, ever true to death, to thee, true to God, to faith and thee, true to thee. Lead us on gallantly, ever on valiantly. Lead thy banner to fight for the church and its right. All for God's own greater glory is our cry, battle cry. Not for gain nor in vain is our strife in this life, but for God who's our King, all to Him our hearts we pray. Growing stronger and stronger as fighting lasts longer, and purer to make heaven surer. With crosses and trials and many denials we'll fight, but to die loyal and true to our King who doth reign on high. Ignatius, lead us on till we rise.
A very big thank you to St. Xavier School, Durgapur, who have concluded this webinar in the Ignatian spirit. On this note, I would conclude the webinar by wishing each one of you in advance a happy feast of Ignatius for the 31st of July.
Our
Good
special
evening.
thanks to Parino for acting as the masters of ceremony. He did a wonderful job. We are grateful to him. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Father. Good
Sir,
night.
I want to ask something.
You want to ask something?
Yeah.
Quickly ask. Quickly ask.
Sir, in which year the Loyola is birth?
Yes, Mavis, please ask your question.
Sir, in which year the Loyola is birth?
You 16th century.
Okay, thank you.
1491.
October.
1491
October.
he was born. 1556 he died.
Sir, your voice is not clear.
1491 October.
1491 he was born. 1556 he died. Okay. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night, Father. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, thank you.
Have a nice. Yes, sir.
Thank you too.